Story 1. I had ovarian cancer. I was carrying a 10-pound tumor on one ovary and a few smaller tumors on the other. I thought I was just gaining weight. Story 2. I left the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel in Mumbai 6 hours before a massive terrorist attack in 2008. Story 3. Back in the late 1990s, I was exposed to and contracted hantavirus. At that time, the mortality rate was about 95%. I had pneumonia-like symptoms for about 6 weeks. My lungs have never been the same. Story 4. I was dying during childbirth, and so was my daughter. She turned 2 today. We have been playing with her new tea set. Story 5. I was sailing when we capsized to windward, with the mast and sail falling toward me. I was pinned underwater by the sail while wearing a life jacket, but I stayed calm, removed the life jacket, and swam out. It was not a lot of fun. Story 6. In early 2024, I had a massive asthma attack that almost killed me. It was my first attack in 10 years. I also had walking pneumonia on top of that. Started when I thought I just had a cold. I was blue around my lips and under my eyes because I could not get enough air. Took me 2 months to recover. Story 7. I had a tumor that was allegedly about 1 centimeter from my brain. For those who care, I have been clean for 15 years. Story 8. I had malnutrition from anorexia. I have been recovered for about 3 years. Story 9. Each day I get closer. But is it real? I survived 2 horrific car crashes. I almost fell off a cliff, and I attempted suicide. I do not know how far I will make it. I am sorry you are feeling this way. Are you safe right now? If you are in immediate danger, please call your local emergency number now. If you are in the United States, you can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Please consider contacting a trusted person or a mental health professional. I can help you find resources in your area if you want. Story 10. Oh boy, this one is fun. Are you ready? When I was in first grade, I fell 40 feet off a ski lift and was evacuated by helicopter to a nearby hospital. My heart stopped for around 7 seconds on the helicopter, so that certainly counts. When I was 12, my mother went insane, started binge drinking, and began abusing me and my siblings. It escalated to the point where she was gone for multiple days at a time, and I would lock myself in my room and climb down off the roof to get food in the middle of the night while they were sleeping. I have type 1 diabetes, so this eventually culminated in me collapsing, vomiting all over myself, taking an ambulance to the hospital, and then being admitted as an inpatient for a month while they figured out what the fuck was going on. That was also near death. When I was 17, I was in Mexico on a surfing trip with some buddies, and while we were walking back from a restaurant at 10 p.m., pissed drunk on cheap tequila, one of my friends bolted and started running back to our house. I ran to chase him, tripped, and fell directly into the highway. I rolled back to the side out of traffic seconds before a semi-truck passed where I had fallen. I barely got hurt, but I certainly felt like I almost died. Last winter, I was homeless and slept outside because the conditions at the shelter caused me anxiety and panic attacks. I slept in a sleeping bag with a blanket, all under a large heavy construction blanket or quilt used to cover equipment. It was about 8 by 9 feet and very heavy. The rain mostly ran off to the sides, and I stayed dry under it during thunderstorms. I used it to trap warm air and block wind and snow. I slept outside through literal blizzards and -5 degrees Fahrenheit conditions with a feels-like temperature of -18 degrees Fahrenheit. That probably counts. I live adjacent to death. It's no surprise. One uncle shot himself in the head behind a building. Another drank himself to death. My high school jazz teacher died of a rare cancer when he was one of the few people I was connecting with. That made it feel even worse. He was beloved by everyone he taught. It was tragic. Somehow I'm still not dead. I have thought about ending my life, but I never fully crossed that barrier. It feels like I may as well wait it out and see what happens and what more I will end up experiencing. If you are thinking about harming yourself or are in immediate danger, please contact emergency services now. In the United States, call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you are outside the United States, please contact your local emergency number or a local suicide prevention hotline, and consider reaching out to someone you trust or a mental health professional. Story 11. I was riding my bike on a rainy evening and slipped and fell into an open floodwater drainage. I still have many nightmares about the incident. Story 12. I almost got raptured. I was sleeping on the first floor and woke up on the ceiling. Being fat helps. Story 13. I suffered a brain aneurysm in June 2024. I made it to the hospital in time to be placed in the intensive care unit for emergency surgery. I am blessed and healing every day. Blessings and prayers to everyone who has gone through this. Story 14. I choked on bok choy when I was alone in the house. I had to reach into my throat to pull it out. Story 15. I died twice after a car accident. Fortunately, I was already in the emergency room by then. Story 16. A few times when I was going through alcohol withdrawal, I was lucky to be alive. Story 17. My 5-year-old brother was caught in a riptide, and I swam out to try to drag him back. I was completely unsuccessful with that method, so I carried him on my shoulders, pushed myself to the bottom, and walked underwater back to the beach. I was not worried about drowning. If I did not bring him back, it would be over for all of us. Story 18. I was septic from an abscess. My doctor said I was 1 to 2 days away from death if I had not come in. Story 19. Riding my bike to the world's highest motorable road, Umling La, at 19,500 feet. No oxygen. No water. I was this close to death. Story 20. Sticking a nail into an outlet was so fun that I did it a second time. Story 21. I got stung by a box jellyfish and tried to avoid the emergency room for as long as I could. I do not know if I would have died, but I felt like I was. I was begging to get the golden shower. Story 22. I nearly died of double pneumonia when I was 4. My mother later told me she heard a noise and went to check on me. I was in bed. The doctor examined me but said there was nothing the hospital could do. More than 50 years later, I remember only a flash of lying on the kitchen table, looking up at the ceiling, and my mother dropping me in the hallway. I was thrashing because I could not breathe and she could not hold on. Story 23. Once, I tripped over a broken broom with a sharp edge and almost got impaled. When I was born, I came out blue. Story 24. It was either when I broke my neck as a teenager or when my neighbor blew up his house last year. I was about 6 feet from the explosion and was only saved by the thickness of my walls. That's one reason I prefer to live in older houses when possible. Story 25. I had a bad car accident years ago. It still shakes me up when I think about it. Story 26. Motorcycle accident. I hit a wall at about 25 miles per hour. The wall was torso height, so I was flung over the top, but my leg, which had a motorcycle foot peg stuck to it, kept me from running into a larger brick wall about 10 feet beyond the first wall. I tore up my calf muscle from being pinned by the foot peg, and my neck was sore from being thrown into an involuntary headbang. I missed the other wall by 1/4 of an inch. After calling emergency services, I was bleeding heavily and packed the wound with the only cloth I had, an oily rag from my pocket. I joked to myself, oil is sterile, right? I called my mother. Very calmly, with my blood-soaked hand, I said, Mom, I think I crashed a motorcycle. I made jokes with the paramedics, nurses, x-ray technician, and doctor about anything and everything. The moment my girlfriend came to pick me up from a concert, I burst into tears as I limped out of the hospital. Stay safe, kids. Don't leave your carburetor exposed. Avoid wearing baggy pants that can catch on the carburetor. And don't rev the engine while leaning into a turn with your knee out. Those things can lead to a crash into a wall. Story 27. I had a massive heart attack at 30. When I arrived at the hospital, I foolishly drove myself, but thank God I made it. I was around 97% blocked when the cardiologist got me into the catheterization laboratory, inserted a radial catheter, and pushed a balloon through to clear the artery. A massive heart attack is also known as the widowmaker. They told me I should not have survived, but I did. I am here today. Story 28. Not sure if this counts, but a double-decker bus with its side mirror extended onto the sidewalk hit the back of my head as it slowed at the bus stop. The others were able to duck, but I was distracted and could not react in time. I thought that impact would cause a serious brain injury, but I fully recovered with no brain damage, as far as I know. Story 29. I had postpartum preeclampsia. My liver was failing and I was convulsing. Super fun. Story 30. I was casually sitting on a beach boulder. The water was just knee-deep when suddenly a huge wave swallowed me and pulled me in. I was not a strong swimmer and became trapped beneath other boulders. The water rose to at least 6 feet. I suffered several large cuts on my body and head. Story 31. These three are the closest I have come to facing judgment. Of course, God decides when I will die. 1. Motorcycle accident. I was wearing a helmet, and my head was stuck under the van's tire. Without the helmet, my head would have been flattened. 2. Hiking along a trail beside a huge cliff, probably more than 100 feet high. It was raining and I was carrying a lot of gear when I slipped and narrowly escaped. I missed falling by only a few inches. 3. A calf cramp while swimming in a lake. I was a new swimmer at the time. I had drowned as a child, which made me fear deep water, though 2 years ago I faced that fear and started swimming again. The lake was around 20 to 30 feet deep. As I swam from one end to the other, my left calf cramped suddenly and I was in a world of pain. I have no idea how, but I managed to wiggle to the shore on adrenaline. This experience made me breathe harder. Story 32. I had a ruptured aorta in 2020. I suffered cardiac arrest on life flight while en route. The surgeon never expected me to arrive alive. Story 33. I swallowed a small screw when I was younger just because. I remember when it popped back out the other side and thinking, wow, I would have been in big trouble if I had died. Story 34. Seizures caused by a calcium deficiency inherited from my mother. My parents took me to my great-grandmother because I was acting weird as a 3-day-old baby. My great-grandmother insisted I be taken to the hospital. The hospital tried to discharge me, describing my episodes as weird hiccups. Right before they discharged me, a consulting doctor named Carball recognized that I was having seizures. I was rushed to a hospital with a pediatric unit 45 minutes away and flatlined 3 times on the way. Story 35. On Halloween 2000, I flew from Taipei to Hong Kong during a major typhoon. My flight landed safely, but a Boeing 747 that landed after us crashed on the runway at Chiang Kai-shek International Airport, killing about half of its passengers. Story 36. My colon ruptured and caused sepsis about 6 years ago, but I am doing great now. Story 37. I overdosed on heroin, collapsed, and stopped breathing. If I had not been revived with naloxone, I would not be here today. I do not remember much. When the dose is very high, you pass out immediately. There were no flashbacks of life, God or the devil, heaven or hell, ending credits or anything like that. I cannot blame anyone else. It was good Afghan heroin that was not laced with fentanyl. I miscalculated the dosage. Story 38. I was skating downhill on a busy road and didn't realize how steep the street was. I lost control of my skateboard and was thrown across the asphalt. I narrowly avoided being hit by a car, but the car split my skateboard in half. I suffered serious injuries and couldn't walk for about 2 weeks. Laughing out loud. Story 39. I am pretty sure I died in January 2017 and am currently residing in hell. Story 40. I'm a champion swimmer, lifeguard, and water safety instructor. I nearly drowned in the Caribbean off Costa Rica on Thanksgiving Day 2005. I hallucinated my father's voice. He was angry and said, "Swim to the side." I panicked and tried everything except the correct action. Eventually, I swam to the side with everything I had left, and the next thing I knew, there was sand under my feet. I heard him as clear as day, out loud. Story 41. My heart function had fallen to a 17% ejection fraction, and I received a heart transplant 14 years ago. Last year, I contracted a viral infection that affected my digestive system, and I spent 2 months in the hospital. I am doing well now. Story 42. There were a couple of near misses in infancy related to overheating or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I fell into a burning fireplace. In adulthood, on holiday in France, the car I was in came inches from a head-on collision with a big rig hurtling down the wrong side of the road. On vacation in central Colombo, Sri Lanka, I fell in the middle of the road while carrying a backpack. I have no idea how I was not hit. More recently, I had a tooth infection that I left for too long. By the time I went to the dentist, my skull was throbbing with unbearable pain that medication would not relieve. The infection may already have spread to a dangerous area, but the industrial-strength antibiotics I was given worked. Story 43. I almost died last month. I had internal bleeding from something that did not seal properly during surgery. I needed an emergency transfusion and a second surgery to fix it. By the time they were rushing me for a computed tomography scan to find the bleed, the blood was pushing up against my diaphragm and I could barely breathe. I only remember about half of that day because I kept passing out. Story 44. When I was a teenager, I thought life would be better if I stayed with my aunt and uncle. My aunt helped me leave my family, but I was wrong. As soon as my aunt left for work at night, my uncle would rape me. He would beat me and hold a pillow over my face until I passed out. When I woke up, every inch of my body hurt and I could not walk. The only benefit of leaving my parents was that we moved from Maryland to Lompoc, California, where my uncle worked at the federal prison. I had a daughter fathered by my uncle. I later went to community college, where I met a man who was very different from anyone I had known. He was the complete opposite of what I was used to. I always felt I was not good enough for him, and though I tried to be a good partner, I felt I failed. We were together for 24 years. Story 45. When I was very young, I had an unstable dresser. When I pulled the top drawer, all the drawers fell on me and I got bruises on my knees. I was lucky it was a cheap, lightweight IKEA dresser rather than a heavy one. I still use it today and everything is broken, so I would not be surprised if it someday caused my death. Another time, my cousin was driving a golf cart recklessly with my other cousin and my step-cousin. Suddenly, he made a sharp swerve while we were on a turn, causing the cart to tip to the other side. My cousin and I were still on it and narrowly avoided being crushed. The two cousins who jumped out in time were not injured, but the cart could have flipped completely and crashed into a steep wall. It might not have been fatal, but it would have caused a severe head injury and heavy trauma to the rest of my body. Thankfully, my step-cousin and I were unable to jump out and stayed on the cart. The weight shift caused it to tip and it only grazed a fence, leaving a dent that remains to this day. Story 46. I had a pericardial effusion causing cardiac tamponade. If treatment had been delayed by a couple of hours, I would have died. Story 47. In a welding class a few weeks ago, one student nearly blew up the oxyacetylene tank. A few days later, another student almost caused the same accident. Story 48. I almost drowned in a pool in Hawaii because I did not realize it was more than 6 feet deep. My mother insisted I already knew how to swim and told me to get in and start kicking so I would move. Story 49. A rogue wave in Malibu, California almost washed me into the ocean. I rolled my mom's Datsun B210 on the Ventura Freeway several times. I was stabbed in junior high school. The knife almost hit my heart. I had intestinal cancer. These events did not occur in this order. Story 50. I almost fell out of a window while standing on a chair to clean my room. Story 51. When I was 6 years old, I was a passenger in a car that lost control and came inches from falling off a cliff in the middle of the Peruvian Andes. The car was stopped by a small but sturdy tree at the edge of the dirt road. If we had been a few inches off, we could have fallen hundreds of meters to our deaths. Story 52. My stepfather shot himself in the hand while I was in the room. I am lucky the bullet did not hit me. I was once slammed into a car door that had the force of a pair of spreaders behind it. I was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time during training. I yelled, "Freeze!" and they released immediately, but hydraulic tools do not care much for the resistance of a squishy person. Story 53. I nearly rode my bicycle off a bridge into a river, and I cannot swim. Thankfully, I braked just as my front tire crossed the edge. Story 54. I passed out while walking in a hot water fountain after taking lysergic acid diethylamide. Oddly, my body collapsed so that one nostril remained above the water, my head rested on my shoulder, and my elbow was straight on the ground. Story 55. Realistically, I don't know. I used to go through condemned buildings for my job. I probably stepped on many unstable structures. Story 56. It is a toss-up between a day when I took 2 packages of sleeping pills and a day when a pit bull bit me in the neck and missed my carotid artery by half an inch. Story 57. I was stranded on a winter hike and rescued with a body temperature below 75 degrees. I was resuscitated and am glad to be alive. Story 58. I got blood poisoning as a teenager. Doctors said if I had come in a day later, I would probably be dead. They do not know how I got it. It was the worst illness I have ever experienced in my life. My entire body felt like a single giant pain center. Story 59. I was getting ready to drive my forklift into a truck as a dock worker when the truck sped away from the dock before I entered. It was an extremely close call and could have been deadly. Story 60. I choked. I remember the terror when I realized that my airway was completely sealed and I could not cough or draw in air. Story 61. I work at a machine shop. I was pressure testing a part that looked like and was about the same size as a fire hydrant. There was a small leak in the part, but I wasn't sure whether it was from the casting or from the seal at the bottom. I grabbed my supervisor and an inspector and we leaned over the trash can we dunked the part into when it suddenly blew off the fixture, hit the ceiling, and landed a few feet from us before we even had a chance to pull our heads away. All 3 of us were lucky we did not die that day. Story 62. My stepfather once fired his gun by accident while messing with it upstairs. The bullet grazed my skull and made a massive hole in the couch I was sitting on downstairs. I nearly had a Soviet-era surplus bullet kill me, so I feel pretty lucky. Story 63. 2 incidents come to mind immediately. As someone who did 7 years of drinking and drug use in 3 years, I am sure I had other close calls I do not remember. 1. I almost got struck by lightning while crossing a railroad to walk to a park to get high during a huge storm just before a football game. I was in the band and a determined pot smoker. 2. My old roommate, a female, had a best friend, also female, who really wanted to sleep with me. One night she showed up at 3 a.m., fresh out of the club, to pick up a bottle of wine she had left in my freezer. My roommate was not home, so I was the only one there. I told her she could take it and went back to gaming in the living room. Next thing I knew, she was sitting next to me, making sexual advances. She looked at her phone and suddenly said she had to leave. A few months later, I found out that her ex, the father of her child, had tracked her location and knew my roommate was not home. He showed up at my front door with a gun, ready to come in and start shooting, which is when she left. All of this happened without my knowledge. Story 64. I was sent away from the emergency room in agonizing pain, dismissed as a hangover from a chest infection. It turned out my gallbladder was chock full of gallstones and was septic. I was taken by emergency helicopter to the hospital and lost consciousness on the operating table twice. Story 65. I was trying to slide down a handrail at a park, but I fell backward, flipped upside down, and almost hit the back of my head on the corner of a concrete step. It might not have killed me, but it could have seriously injured me. Story 66. I was playing on a frozen pond as a child. The ice was thin in one area, and I fell through. As I panicked to get out, the ice kept breaking away. My head went under the water, and my muscles began to lock up from the cold. After what seemed like an eternity, I managed to get out. I then rode my bike home a few miles. My clothes were frozen and crunchy by the time I got into the house. Story 67. I had 9 stabbing wounds all over my body. The front of my neck was split open, but it was not quite deep enough. Sometimes I wish the assailant had not been so incompetent. Story 68. I've struggled with depression for the better part of 3 decades and have had suicidal thoughts for the same length of time. I have never attempted suicide for various reasons, including not having a method. Once, my stepfather borrowed his cousin's revolver to deal with a pest around the house. I do not remember what it was. Several times I looked at that revolver and thought, I should finally do it. I am sorry you are feeling this way. If you are in immediate danger, call emergency services now. If you are in the United States, you can call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you are elsewhere, please contact your local emergency number or a local suicide prevention hotline. Story 69. 2 major motorcycle accidents. During the second one, I remember a police officer opening my helmet visor and asking, "You're alive?" I don't remember much after that. I also rolled a farm tractor with no roll cage and couldn't jump free because my boot got stuck under the brake pedal. I ended up under the tractor in thankfully soft mud, in a small wedge-shaped hole between the large rear wheel and the ground. No more motorcycles or tractors for me. Story 70. I fell and landed on my back at a university concert. All I could see were the soles of the shoes of people who were jumping to the music. I kept thinking, please do not jump on my skull. I could have suffered brain damage or lost brain function entirely. Story 71. I had a 16 by 11 tumor in my chest caused by lymphoma. The doctor in the emergency department said if I had not come when I did, it could have been fatal. The tumor was causing fluid to accumulate in the sac around my heart and around my liver. I could barely breathe or eat. My family doctor had kept telling me I was fine for a month, and I felt like I was going crazy. Thank God I went to the emergency department. Story 72. Someone thought I smelled bad in Rikers and took an enormous cheap shot because I walked in his vicinity. I left the intake area screaming and vomited throughout the clinic. I later discovered that I had suffered skull fractures caused by the anonymous blow. I never even got a look at his face. Story 73. I nearly died from sudden infant death syndrome when I was a baby. My mother found me in time and said I was gray and limp. She nearly went to lie down for a nap but decided to check on me first. Story 74. I had a flesh-eating streptococcal infection and sepsis. I was in a Honda Civic when we hit 2 semis on the interstate. I walked away, but if things had gone slightly differently, we would have ended up under at least one of the semis. Story 75. I was born with Hirschsprung's disease. It means I was born with a colon that did not work properly. If not for surgery I had as a baby, I would not have survived beyond a few months. I almost developed sepsis when I was little because my father did not give me my medicine. I remember becoming very sick and waking up in a hospital. I was told I was turning blue. Story 76. I went septic and almost died in October 2019. I was released on Halloween. It was my first and only ambulance ride. The emergency room doctor at the second hospital told me that if I had waited any longer, I would have been dead by the next morning. I was 28 years old. Story 77. I had an epileptic seizure in my sleep and was choking on my own tongue. My brother, who lived away at university, was home that night and in bed next to my other brother, who was still awake. He noticed that I was having a seizure and immediately called my parents. I'm here to say it ended well. Story 78. I developed toxic shock syndrome from a cannula when I was hospitalized for a chest infection. I was then allergic to a drug they gave me to bring it under control, and my body started shutting down. My dad was told to expect the worst. I spent 3 wild days in the pediatric intensive care unit, heavily sedated with painkillers. Story 79. I was thrown out of my body during my first generalized tonic-clonic seizure. Story 80. Antibiotic-resistant pneumonia was a very close call. Story 81. I was in a car accident when I was 15 and was airlifted to the hospital. I spent 130 days in the hospital, including 17 days in a coma. I had to relearn how to walk, chew, and swallow. It has been a rough road. Story 82. I had 2 serious incidents when I was 4, and I do not know which happened first. One occurred at the local pool. There were no lifeguards. As my father packed up to leave, my older sister went in to get me. The waves created by her walking toward me were strong and pushed me deeper. Luckily, my father noticed in time and cleared the water from my lungs before it was too late. The other happened after I developed my first cold sore. My mouth was so painful and swollen that I refused to eat or drink anything and became dangerously dehydrated. I spent all day sleeping and kept telling my mother that I would drink water when I felt better. She took me to the doctor, but the doctor said I was fine despite my symptoms. She ignored the doctor's advice and took me to the emergency room. There she was told that if I had arrived any later I would have needed emergency dialysis and that I had begun to experience kidney failure. It was caught early enough that a few days in the hospital with extensive intravenous fluids saved me. I survived both and am here to tell the tale in random Reddit threads. Story 83. My brother, who was 8 years old, drowned me when I was 4 years old in the bathtub. My mother went to get her sister, who called the ambulance. I was not breathing for several minutes, and then they were able to remove all of the water from my lungs. I am 33 now. I have had some intense experiences in the years since. Story 84. When I was in junior school, about 10 or 11 years old, many of my classmates went to the swimming pool at the same time. We did not organize a meetup, but on Saturday afternoons there were floats and inflatables, and a huge group of us would often end up there. One day we were messing around, having a girls versus boys fight over the floats. I was on a float when a boy from my class jumped on it and pushed me off. At first it seemed like part of the fun, but for some reason he kept moving the float over me as I tried to surface, so I could not get out of the water to breathe. I panicked because I was not a strong swimmer and we were in the deep end, so I could not touch the bottom. Thankfully, my friend shoved him away and pulled me out, but I remember things starting to go black. It was horrible. It was almost 30 years ago, and it still makes me uncomfortable to remember. Story 85. I told my wife yes when she asked if that dress made her look fat. Story 86. A horse I was training jumped out of the arena while I was riding him. He was a quarter horse and can accelerate from 0 to full speed in a nanosecond. I held on during the jump, then hit the ground and bounced 3 times. You forget how to breathe when that happens. It is all on video. Story 87. I did it. I got better, but I was dead for about a minute. Story 88. I once stepped onto a crosswalk when the light was red because I thought it was green and it seemed like a good idea. My headphones were on. A car stopped and blasted its horn, so I walked back to where I had been. I still think about it from time to time. Story 89. I have drowned a few times, been knocked seriously unconscious a couple of times, and overdosed twice. The closest I came to death was one of the drownings. Story 90. Opioid overdoses, too many to count. No near-death experiences during any of them. Story 91. I was in a scooter accident, but my helmet saved me. I was not able to walk properly for a few weeks. Story 92. In 3rd grade, I was pushed out of the school treehouse and had a high chance of dying, but I survived with only a broken arm. The child who pushed me did not get in trouble because he was the gym teacher's son. Story 93. A glass shard cut me. I forgot exactly how, but it was about 2 centimeters away from hitting the veins in my wrist, if that counts. I am sorry that happened. Are you safe right now? If you are in immediate danger, call emergency services right away. If you are in the United States, you can call or text 988 for support. If you are outside the United States, please contact your local emergency services or a local crisis hotline. Consider telling a trusted person or a mental health professional how you are feeling. Story 94. I fell from a 2-story building and landed on my head. I still don't know how I survived. I had a hairline fracture of my skull and woke up almost 2 to 3 hours later. Story 95. I was involved in 2 separate head-on collisions. In both incidents, I was on a bicycle. One involved a car and the other involved a van. Story 96. Technically, it is happening now. I do not know when or how I will die, but I am closer to death than I have ever been. Story 97. I had no idea what happened, but I went into autopilot and walked across a busy road in the middle of a crowded city center. I walked past more than 8 people who were standing there waiting for the green light. About halfway across the road, I heard a horn and tires screeching next to me, and I snapped back to reality. I then had to finish crossing the street as they watched me from the other side. I had never come close to being hit by a car before then. Story 98. When I worked at Walmart as a cart pusher, I had several near-death encounters with drivers whose actions could have resulted in involuntary manslaughter. They would drive at over 60 miles per hour in the parking lot to get a parking spot, and they nearly ran me over. Story 99. I almost drowned. Several large waves took me under. I only made it because the waves eventually washed me close enough to stand on the ground. Story 100. I choked on a piece of steak on separate occasions with no one around, so I had to perform the Heimlich maneuver on myself using a chair as I was losing consciousness. It was the scariest thing that ever happened to me, and now I cut my food into smaller pieces and chew thoroughly. Story 101. I fainted in the shower once. I experienced untreated heat stroke because I thought my job training would be enough to help me. After I had to go out that day, I spent many hours in nearly freezing water trying to lower my temperature, but I was so hot I could not think straight. The only lingering effect is a headache, but I am alive. Story 102. I was pulled out into the ocean by a current. Only fear and adrenaline got me close enough for a strong swimmer to grab me. I was sore for a week. Story 103. I almost crashed my car 100 times. I'm terrible at driving. Story 104. I was nearly choked on jelly. After one large swallow, I could not breathe or speak. Luckily, my mother was there and saved me. Story 105. I went to a swimming pool. I am fairly tall and I saw a friend go to the deep end. I thought, she's there. Nothing can happen to me. The difference was that she knew how to swim and I did not. I began to drown. My brother pulled me out, and I could not stop crying that day. Story 106. I swam 5 miles across a body of water to the coast of a country that was at war and experienced machine guns strafing in front of me. They were just warning me to stay away. I was not sure I could swim back. I ended up off course and came ashore in a desert and was unsure I could walk back to town in the heat without shoes. Adventurous kids in a jeep picked me up. I was very lucky. That was my best story, but I have been closer to death at least 2 other times. Story 107. I have untreated pneumonia and have never coughed that much in my life. Story 108. Luckily, I was too young to remember. When I was 5, I was stung by a bee and nearly died. My mother rushed me to the emergency room, and the doctor said that if she had waited 5 more minutes, I would likely have died. People still have the audacity to think I am overreacting about my fear of bees. Story 109. He moved into a house down the street and one day walked past my house while I was watching people from my window and masturbating. I thought I was finished. Story 110. It was Snowpocalypse 2010 in the District of Columbia, which dumped 17.8 inches of snow on a city that was not equipped to handle it. I did not have to work, so I had gone out for the night. I was in my early 20s and was with friends. I was walking home, slightly inebriated, and went to cross the street. I had the right of way, and then, boom, I woke up on the sidewalk with a bunch of people hovering over me. I started panicking, thinking I had drunkenly fallen, and insisted on getting up and leaving. The bystanders refused to let me get up and informed me that I had slipped on a patch of ice and been clipped by a station wagon as I crossed the street. Although I felt no pain, I instantly thought I was going to die and called my parents hysterically as we waited for the ambulance to arrive. I ended up in Georgetown Hospital for 3 days and suffered a fractured nose, 2 chipped teeth, a broken arm, and a face that looked like I had been mauled. They never found the station wagon driver who hit me. I am thankful to the bystanders who stayed with me that night. It was just before Valentine's Day, and one of them even brought me balloons at the hospital. Story 111. At birth, the umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck. I showed no signs of life and the doctor had to resuscitate me. After that, things got worse. Story 112. Shortly after my 61st birthday, I got sick without knowing it. I climbed out of the hot tub and remembered thinking, "Ooh, you almost tripped. Big guy. You better be careful." Except for a flash of memory about an ambulance, I remembered nothing for the next 48 hours. I was admitted to the intensive care unit with a temperature of 104.7 degrees Fahrenheit and a heart rate over 200. I had recently returned from a trip to the tropics, so they tested me for every disease you can imagine and some you cannot. They also gave me antibiotics, coded twice. I began recovering at about 48 hours, and the lab results confirming the diagnosis came back at 72 or 96 hours. Anaplasmosis, a relative of Lyme disease. A tiny tick had caused this. I was in the hospital for 4.5 days. It took 6 to 8 weeks to recover mentally and cognitively. While taking a supervised walk around the ward to get out of bed, I saw a doctor sitting behind a desk. He was grinning and said, I bet you do not remember me, but you were hilarious when I admitted you. Apparently I was doing a shtick, but I do not remember it. Then, his expression became somber and he pointed to a 3 to 4-inch gold star with my picture tacked to a bulletin board. He said, we do not get many who come in as sick as you and walk out. So we like to put up something that reminds the team of their successes. Story 113. I coughed during an endoscopy, and the surgical instrument nicked a vein in my throat. That was the reason I was having the endoscopy in the first place. Could have happened while eating or just going about my day. The only reason I survived was that it happened on an operating table in a hospital where immediate care was available. They had 4 intravenous lines in me and transferred me to Massachusetts General Hospital, a state away during a snowstorm. I woke up from the coma they put me in 3 days later, very confused. Story 114. Laughing out loud, I tried to board a train that had already started moving. I fell, and my leg became stuck in the gap between the train and the platform. Luckily, someone pressed the emergency brake. Otherwise, I might have become a human steak. Story 115. I have had so many that I am honestly thinking quantum immortality is the most practical theory. Story 116. I had hand, foot, and mouth disease in middle school. The mortality rate for that illness is 6%, so there was a fair chance I could have died. I survived, which shows my luck. I have not had a close call with death. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.